My Shadow. This is a poem that we are going to learn today, written by Robert Louis Stevenson, a well-known poet and who has written a collection of poems for children. Now, I'm going to show you something. Do you know what this is? Yes, it's a timepiece. And what is the use of this timepiece? It tells you the time. Well, in today's world, we all have these kind of gadgets that tell us the time. Whereas in olden days, people had no such thing as the clock or the timepiece or the watch to tell us the time. They used to look at the sun and the length of the shadow, whether it's increasing or decreasing. By that they could say the almost approximate time. So the shadows were the ways in which people could tell the time in the olden days. So today's lesson is My Shadow. Please get on to page 24 in the textbook. My Shadow. A long time ago, people observed the way shadows are formed by the sun and utilized that principle in making the world's most primitive clocks. Primitive means age old, very, very old. This is not a primitive clock, this is a modern clock. Primitive clock is the sundial and the water clocks, the sandy glass clocks. So you have the sundial, then you have the water clocks, that is all the primitive time. And the name of the person who invented the first clock is Christian Huygens. Christian Huygens, sorry, it is Christian Huygens who invented the first clock. And today we have different models in shapes and sizes of clocks, a variety of them spread out in every clock shop. Now let's read. I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see. He is very, very like me, from the heels up to the head, and I see him jump before me when I jump into my bed. I have a little shadow that goes in and out with me, and what can be the use of him is more than I can see. He is very, very like me, from the heels up to the head, and I see him jump before me when I jump into my bed. Now here in the text you can see a small boy, and his shadow is of course measuring definitely bigger than him. Now this boy says that my shadow is just like me. If I go out, he goes out with me. If I come in, he comes in with me. But the best part is that when I jump into bed, he also jumps in before me into bed. And he's same like me, like my twin brother, same from head to foot. Now this boy doesn't know what is the scientific implication behind a shadow. But he is curious and he wants to know what this is. What is the function of this shadow, or what is this phenomenon? The funniest thing about him is the way he likes to grow. Not at all like proper children, which is always very slow. For he sometimes shoots up, taller like an India rubber ball, and he sometimes gets so little, there's none of him at all. The funniest thing about him is the way he likes to grow. Not at all like proper children, which is always very slow. For he sometimes shoots up, taller like an India rubber ball, and he sometimes gets so little, there's none of him at all. Now again the boy wonders why sometimes of the day this shadow, which looks a lot like him, exactly like him, sometimes it becomes so long, that is of course there, and sometimes it becomes so short and sometimes it disappears. But he doesn't understand it is because of the different the way the sun's rays are falling on the earth, the size of the shadow varies. So he wonders why is this so, and that's why he says all of a sudden the shadow grows so tall like an India rubber ball, and next minute he gets so little that there is nothing of him at all. He hasn't got a notion of how children ought to play and can only make a fool of me in every sort of way. He stays so close besides me, he's a coward you can see. I think shame to stick to Nursey as that shadow sticks to me. He hasn't got a notion of how children ought to play and can only make a fool of me in every sort of way. He stays so close beside me, he's a coward you can see. I think shame to stick to Nursey as that shadow sticks to me. So this boy again says, see, I go to play, but the shadow is never out to play. He's always sticking with me. He doesn't know how to play with other children. He doesn't know how to mingle with other children. So I think he must be a coward. Coward means a person who's afraid. So he says, this shadow is not a very brave boy. He's a coward. He always sticks to me. Like he says, the boy says, I was always sticking to my Nursey. Nursey means nanny, or the person who looked after him when he was a small boy. So usually when children are small, they cling on to the nanny or the nurse who looks after them. So this boy feels that the shadow is clinging on to him like he used to stick to his nanny. One morning very early before the sun was up, I rose and found the shining dew on every buttercup. But my lazy little shadow, like an arrant sleepyhead, had stayed at home behind me and was fast asleep in his bed. One morning very early before the sun was up, I rose and found the shining dew on every buttercup. But my lazy little shadow, like an arrant sleepyhead, had stayed at home behind me and was fast asleep in his bed. Now one fine day he gets up, the small boy gets up very early, and he goes and sees outside that the dew drops are there in each buttercup, that is a flower. But then he realizes that his shadow is not there with him and his shadow is fast asleep in the bed. So he thinks it's a very lazy boy, the shadow is a very lazy boy and cannot get up early in the morning and come with him outside. But the reality is that this shadow is not another person, it is just the shadow of this same boy. But he fails to realize the scientific phenomena behind this, that a shadow is formed when light falls on any other object. So here the theme of the poem is nothing else but curiosity and wonder. The boy wonders how shadows are formed. The boy wonders how the shadow is moving with him, sticking to him, and it's a part of him. Sometimes the shadow appears, sometimes the shadow disappears. So this boy is really wondering what is wrong with this shadow, or what is this shadow. But he doesn't go and ask any elderly person, he just thinks to himself and he tries to find out the answer to these questions. With this I come to the end of this poem. It's a very good poem. If you can read it once or twice, you will enjoy reading it. Written by a very famous writer, Robert Louis Stevenson, who has written a lot of poems for small children. Now let's go on to the exercises. A. Is the poet writing as an adult or a child? Give reason for your views. Look for a clue in the third stanza. Now, in the first one, he is as a child because he says, I have a little shadow. So in the first stanza, the poet is writing like a child. But in the second stanza, he writes as, he hasn't got a notion of how children ought to play. So there also he writes as a child. B. Answer the following questions. What is the difference between the shadow's growth and that of proper children? Now shadows grow depending upon the way the sun's rays are falling on the earth. But normal children grow slowly and slowly, not in one day. They don't attain their full height in one day. They grow slowly, step by step. 2. Why does the speaker in the poem call the shadow a coward? Now the shadow is called a coward because this shadow is always sticking to the small boy. It is never aloof or never separated from the small boy. So the shadow is referred to as a coward. 3. Was the shadow really asleep in bed very early one morning? Why was there no shadow? No, there was no shadow sleeping in the bed. There was no shadow because the sunlight had not reached the room yet. Only when sunlight falls on any particular object, shadows are formed. So here very clearly we can say that sunlight had not reached the room and so there was no shadow. 4. Pick out any 3 rhyming word pairs in the poem. For example, ball, all, head, bed, up, buttercup, play, way, me, see, grow, slow. Next one. Does everything have a shadow? Yes. Everything in this world has a shadow when it comes under the rays of the sun. With this, we come to the end of this poem. Your homework will be in the notebook and sent to the school WhatsApp number. Thank you.